Hi everyone, welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us this Friday afternoon here in downtown Providence, and I'd like to welcome in my guest from Providence College, Professor of Sociology, Eric Hirsch. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate your coming downtown to talk with us and to talk with viewers about a recent report put out between PC and a number of stakeholders in the community looking at ways to address ending long-term homelessness in Rhode Island. So talk with us a little bit about who you partnered with and what the approach was before we'll get to the findings.
Sure. I mainly thought about doing this report because we know now how to end what I call long-term homelessness. People have been living in our shelter system for years, and I felt like this was something we really needed to get out to the public as a whole and certainly to our legislators as well. So I reached out to Housing Works, who does a great job of producing reports. I work with the Coalition for the Homeless almost every day on this problem of trying to end homelessness. And Crossroads, Rhode Island, they run the largest shelter in the state called Harrington Hall. And I felt that would be a good way to start if we could close Harrington Hall. This will take years, but the idea is, why do we have 128 people, men, staying in this gymnasium in bunk beds every night? That's not really acceptable. It's not a place you should be living, and that's really what's happening. Some people have lived there for 3 or 4 years at a time. That's really not acceptable.
And let's talk a little bit about going through and actually gathering the data, taking a look at that snapshot here in January 2019.
Right, so we have something called the Homeless Management Information System. I oversee that data and the collection of that data. So anytime someone comes into an emergency shelter or talks to an outreach worker on the street, they're entered into that database, and we track people through that system. And somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 people become homeless every year in Rhode Island. That's way too many. We don't really need to have that many homeless people, and it's not even cost effective to have those people in the shelter system.
Now, you said at the outset, we know how to end this issue. So there were a number of recommendations made after gathering this information. And again, here we are in 2019. What's going to move that needle? And it sounds like it's a shift in approach, a real kind of monumental shift that sounds like it might just need some political capital behind.
Exactly right. So we think of it now as, shelters are the solution to homelessness. But I point out that's how we count homeless people. How many people are in the shelters? So it's the opposite of a solution. It institutionalizes homelessness. Instead, we need to move to a housing solution, meaning we should immediately put people into permanent housing, provide them with the rental subsidies they need to stay there, and then any kind of services they need also to make sure they can stay in that housing. The thing that people miss, that can actually save money, because people in the shelter system, or if they're living on the street, use a lot of emergency services, particularly Medicaid. So we actually, for certain groups of people, it can be cheaper to put them in an apartment. Another example would be families. 1,000 children were homeless last year. It's cheaper to put them in an apartment because if you put them in a shelter, that shelter has to be staffed year-round, 24 hours a day. Just give them a rental subsidy. It's cheaper, and it solves the problem of family homelessness.
So do I expect to see Professor Hirsch providing some testimony perhaps in the coming weeks and months? And can this really be tackled at the state level? Does there need to be any federal involvement?
We do. We get about $6 million a year from the federal government to try to solve this problem. That's not nearly enough. I've estimated we need to spend about $21 million a year total, and we need a state contribution. We need state money to build permanent housing units for very low-income people. We need state money for rental subsidies so that people can live in those units. And we have to get the state support for services, mental health services, for example, health services for people who are homeless as well.
So I know you're very focused here on Rhode Island, but do you know of any other states that have sort of started to go down this road and look at the model, again, moving away from that shelter approach and looking more at the housing side of it?
I mean, some of our neighbors are great examples, like Connecticut and Massachusetts. They spend about $80 per person in the state in Connecticut, about $100 per person in Massachusetts. We spend at the most about $15. So we're way behind in terms of the resource commitment. And I really think it's something that we've never prioritized the way we need to. And I think if it can actually save money for a certain group of homeless people, why wouldn't we do it?
So have you had conversations with stakeholders, with elected officials, if you will, to look at perhaps the legislative side of things to begin looking at policy changes that you plan on advocating for?
We absolutely have. Usually the problem is there's a structural deficit, there's a problem of not having the resources. We do have a dedicated funding stream. When deeds are transferred in Rhode Island, we do get some money from that. So that's about $4 or $5 million a year.
But as you said, needs to be higher, closer to that 21 level than at the current one.
We would like to see a budget line item every year. We don't have that. There's no budget line item for housing. And I'm waiting for someone to tell me there's any other state in the union that doesn't have a budget line item for housing. I don't think there is. So if any of the viewers know of one, let me know.
You know, you raise an interesting point, because as you're advocating for that increased investment and opportunities, you say it really will end up having a cost savings effect in the end.
And I don't quite understand why when we talk about economic development, why we're not thinking of housing as a key economic development opportunity. Think of all the jobs that creates, and then it also has the benefit of housing people with very low incomes.
Well, we'll provide a copy of this report that was recently released, again, in conjunction with a number of stakeholders here in the state. So I'm kind of curious, again, what's next? As you said, talking with folks, again, seeing how to implement these changes. But for you, with your professor cap on, what can we expect in the coming months?
I think the key really is to make the public aware of this situation and get them to move the General Assembly to do more than they're doing. We have to do this from the ground up, from the grassroots. So call your legislators and ask what they're doing about housing in this session.
Very good. The General Assembly session has just kicked off. It'll be going through June, no doubt, and I appreciate your taking the time to come here, talk about this important report. Again, the findings found, we'll share a link to that as well. And I'll let you head back up to the College on the Hill there. So, Professor Eric Hirsch, thank you so much for taking the time to come in, and thank you for joining us to learn more about this report and this important topic. That just about wraps up another week here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Of course, be sure to tune in to GoLocalProv.com and find us on Facebook throughout the weekend, and of course on Sunday for Super Bowl Sunday. Monday, Josh Fenton will be back for Business Monday here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Go Local News Editor